And we're back. Um, so I think that was the last of our prepared videos. I know you're all deeply curious about how I did in the run for election, in the Ontario election. I ran against Catherine McKinney, who is has a very strong ground game as an NDP here in Ottawa Centre, and there were 7 candidates running. What I learned running a couple of years ago for school trustee was that it's not so much about getting elected as getting a conversation happening with people and drawing attention to the issues that we're concerned about. So I didn't get elected to Queens Park. I wasn't really in the race for that purpose. So coming up, we've got Kellie-Lynn Peary, um, and I'm looking through the list of attendees to see if she has arrived yet. I'll share a little story. I was traveling last summer from Ottawa to BC, where I had the pleasure of having a coffee with Scotty, not far from Nanaimo, and meeting in person after being online friends for a couple of years. And on the way, I was 3 days into the trip, and I had pulled the Jeep and the trailer over a little bit east of the Winnipeg or the Manitoba border. And I learned from Melanie Bennett um, that Kellie-Lynn was in Winnipeg with some friends or just north of Winnipeg with some friends at a conference for the weekend. And we managed to jump in together near Brandon, Manitoba. Kellie-Lynn jumped in with me in the Jeep, and I pulled the roof down, and we drove around four plus hours together. Good part of the day to get to Regina, and had a great conversation. The first time we had a chance to meet in person, and really grateful that Kellie-Lynn is speaking out on these issues. I'm going to bring our duty up here just to join in the conversation. Our duty, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but you're texting me at the moment, and
That's okay. That's okay. We're waiting on Kelly. I'm in text with her, and she was in a course today and making her way home.
okay. So, our duty. What were some of your takeaways here? We've had a couple of great, recordings that we shared, and thankful that Josh joined us. Uh, do you have any takeaways to share from the content tonight, or do you have any updates from our duty about what's happening on your side of things? There was one organization I'm curious about. Maybe I'll kind of give you the floor for a second. That is the Ember Light Project, something I've never heard of before. Do you have more details on that?
Yeah, I do. So the Emberlight Project, it is a new not for profit organization. Um, it has been established out of Ontario, um, and and they are really, they are really working on, I believe, more of the policy aspect of these things. They're supporting detransitioners and parents alike. Um, and I think we're going to have to wait a little bit to see exactly what they're offering and what their goal is as an organization. Kelly's on her way. I'm just getting updates here that she's like 5 minutes away. So, um, the other thing that I wanted to say was that Josh, I really did not expect that to be more of an interview style conversation with you, Shannon. And I think that you and Josh both handled that very well, and it went very well. It was really nice to hear the sort of the more intimate side of things. Um, it's really difficult to understand how this ideology actually affects a human, a young human, you know, and um, and I think we heard that fairly clearly from Josh this evening. So I was on a Zoom call with Faith and her mom, which is where the recording originated from. And it was really, really heartwarming to hear both of their stories, and just keeping in mind that mother and daughter were connected throughout the entire experience. I think that's very difficult to do now with this ideology, and keeping in mind also that that was about 10 years ago. um, with this ideology and its kind of stronghold on everything, it's very difficult for mother and daughter like Faith and Amy to be connected through this entire experience. I think it's very rare. And I think that we all kind of long for that. But I think it's also possible even within all of this bombard of ideology.
Mhm. Yeah. Kellie-Lynn,
Hi, Shannon.
I was just
Sure.
telling you everyone about our ride in the Jeep back in June.
Oh, that was amazing, eh? Yes.
First time we had a chance to meet in person, and it was just a great coincidence. We happened to be going the same direction on the same day across the country,
Yeah.
and could line up that way, and really memorable afternoon um, on that trip across country for me. And not the only conversation I had about gender identity ideology and wokeness and DEI and things along the way. And it was a great kickoff to a good couple of weeks of meeting with people across Canada. What are you sharing with us tonight, Kellie-Lynn? I could jump back to uh, the bio. Actually, that's probably what I should do, and just introduce you to people who haven't met you before. And okay, bear with me. Kellie-Lynn is a detransitioned woman in British Columbia who was born a girl in 1966. She entered into the trans-delusion in 2004 and began taking testosterone in 2005, followed by a complete hysterectomy in 2006, and then an elective double mastectomy in 2008. She experienced full on regret in 2010 and initiated medical assistance in detransitioning in 2024.
Yeah.
Kellie-Lynn is working with others towards much needed change in gender laws and practices in Canada. Welcome,
I think,
Kellie-Lynn, and thanks for joining us. It sounds like you've had a busy day.
thanks,
Um,
Shannon. Yeah. I went to a retreat on the weekend and then had school today, earlier today. So just coming back to earth from both those experiences. But I think this past year has been such, in some ways, a year of hope because it feels like people are finally starting to listen to the narrative outside of the gender affirmation model. Like we had the WPATH files, we had the CAS report, we had England putting together now they're going to study the adult outcomes with transitioning. And I mean, we're seeing this amazing shift in the gender affirmation people. Now they're going, whoa, 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 whoa. You need to stop looking at the morbidity and mortality outcomes and start asking people, well, how do you feel about having been able to access this? Because the research is showing again and again and again that these interventions aren't helping people in the long run. And it feels like people are finally um, the researchers are able to speak up and be heard. Whereas for so long there it felt like WPATH just had this grip. And those who were willing to put a paper forward couldn't make it through the peer review process because their peers weren't comfortable being down on the review process, or people even like getting something past their ethics committees. Lisa Littman was such a trailblazer there, not only still managing to get her report out, but then the people afterwards who started to come forward and get their stuff out. And it's like, I know it's like a long haul process, but I think now is the time to really press in and keep going forward because we're finally being heard.
Mhm. The changes are remarkable and accelerating, and you know, in the last 2 months, I mean, it's been 6 weeks really since Trump's inauguration and the big changes, you know, at least announcements in terms of executive orders in the United States. There was recently also an investigation or a study in Australia, which I thought was, you know, pretty dug in onto the into the ideological side of this, and it seems like they're going to actually have a, a reasonable look, an examination of these practices, especially with the pediatric side of things. So there's big movement happening, and uh, yeah, there is hope.
Yeah, and like the big voices are starting to be challenged. Like, um, I've run into some of Olson Kennedy's research, and with her facing the lawsuit that she's facing in California, that's going back to questioning her ethics when she decided not to publish her research, because she has signed on several studies that have shown the exact opposite of her research. And she was even one of the ones, she's one of the authors on the paper saying that we need to start studying outcomes differently because when we're just looking at morbidity and mortality, so suicide, how does it affect the liver? How does it affect the body? How does it affect the cognition? How does it affect mental health? She's like, those are giving a false report because people want this. So we should be giving it to them because they want it, not because it's going to improve their physical health or their mental health. Um, and she's one of the signatories on that research. Um, and yet she's sitting on research that showed that when you're measuring suicidal ideation, when you're measuring the physical outcomes, these interventions don't help. And the more and more people are starting to talk about reality affirming care, saying that um, WPATH knew back in the 70s when John Hopkins got closed down that reality affirming care was more helpful and gave better outcomes across the board than doing these surgical interventions. And yet WPATH continued pushing for the surgical intervention.
Yeah. That study
So
that Olson Kennedy, you're talking about, two things I would add that viewers may not know. Olson Kennedy was granted more than $9 million to do that study, and it came up as null findings, or as findings opposite to what the initial hypothesis was.
correct.
I get the hypothesis and theory things confused sometimes, but they were contrary to what the narrative is, and so the study was buried. And now it's my understanding that there's going to be a congressional investigation into why that federal government money, or that grant money, was allocated to that, and she did not publish the findings. That was back in 2014. So if this more robust discourse had been encouraged, 10 years ago plus, we might have had a different conversation happening. But as we know, all along the way here, reality is suppressed,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
ideology and narrative is elevated.
yeah.
Um,
And the young woman who's brought forward the lawsuit in California is going, not only did Olson Kennedy continue to fast track me, but she knew that the interventions she was offering me were not likely to improve my mental health outcomes. So, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely wild. We've got some news here in Canada as well, with two studies recently published, our own systematic reviews of evidence. A friend of Our Duty and a friend of Canadian Culture Wars Report, Chan Maruzi, who is a PhD researcher, um, from Southern Ontario was one of the authors on both of those systematic reviews. A highlight for her was she got boosted by J.K. Rowling, among others, when she promoted her findings on X. And we're seeing a lot of good movement here in Canada. Crossing our fingers, of course, it looked a lot more positive a few weeks ago that we would have a conservative government come in, and that we could have a government that's aware and concerned about these issues in power. I think this goes to what I was talking about earlier, not necessarily running for election, but getting involved with your local EDAs, electoral district associations,
Yes.
and getting to know your candidates and making sure that they're aware of the issues. And there's a little quid pro quo. If you go out and you help knock on doors with your local candidate, and get involved in your local EDA, you have an opportunity to talk with the candidates about why you're out and why it's so important to you that they get elected,
Yeah.
and make them aware of things that are happening. Um, Now, Kellie-Lynn, there was a specific agenda thing. We have talked before, and we could talk at length about things, and there was no shortage when we were driving across the prairies on that windy day. And I want to make sure that
I want to touch one more thing on politics that I never thought of at all, but just like in the BC provincial election, my candidate didn't get elected. However, the opportunities for engagement with the NDP party that happened just by going to the different debates and stuff like that, you will have an opportunity, especially if you remember to get somebody to record it for you, to have conversations with them. And there's points and times where they will reveal the depth to which they have no idea what the true issues on this subject are. Um, so getting involved in local politics, even to the stage of just volunteering on an individual's campaign, like they always need volunteers and they always need people to come out and support them when they do attend the public debates. And those opportunities are um, just amazing in how far it can shift, and people just knowing that it's just an amazing opportunity to have your voice heard.
indeed. Now, I'm looking at the agenda items here, and it says policy changes needed to counter gender ideology in Canada. Uh,
Yes.
we've talked about the politics from which we get policy. And you were working the last time we talked on some recommendations for policy framework changes. Have you got some updates
Yeah.
for us?
I'm still working on the ID, and saying that if the government is going to track gender identity on provincial ID and on federal ID, those two categories need to be different. We need to recognize that sex in our legislation continues to exist separate from gender ID. Um, where gender ID has been added to the provincial human rights code and where it's been added to our federal legislation, it's all been added as two completely separate categories. So by artificially capturing gender as sex on ID, they're creating a artificial conflating of the two categories that legally exist as two separate categories. So um, I'm continuing to move forward to press the provincial government and the federal government to track those two things separately, because you created two separate categories. So let's keep them separate. This isn't about eliminating sex. This is about tracking sex as assigned at birth or as observed at birth, because the trans queer activists are saying that gender can change by a week or a month or a day. So if you want to track this fluid thing that can change, then track it completely separately. And let's recognize it as a category completely separate from biology and quit. I mean, my life literally hinged on the doctor's understanding that The mass that I had in my perianal area was an abscess formation that was a complication from my hysterectomy and not an enlarged prostate. It made the difference between me having emergency surgery that night and being sent home to go talk to my doctor the next week. And the complications I have as a result of taking testosterone and as a result of being an adult who lives with childhood sexual exploitation have to do with my urinary tract. And it's important that doctors understand that I have a female biological urinary tract. Like when I was taking testosterone, I was constantly needing to disclose that to doctors because of the beard and stuff and the voice. I looked and sounded male. So in order to get the proper medical care, they needed to know I'd been born a girl.
Right.
So it's really important that the biological reality remains on our ID.
Mm-hmm. I got a question come from Scotty in the chat. And if we need to circle back more on that ID issue, I will. But Scotty says, Kelly, did BC MLA George Anderson ever get back to you about bringing resources for detransitioners into schools?
Not a zip. No. And that is another area where um, just asking questions at the school board meetings, like when they're like addressing the SOGI, what part of the SOGI curriculum addresses the detransitioning's voice? Because we have the ruling at the federal government Supreme Court level that says the marginalized voice of the marginalized is the one that is supposed to be amplified the most. That was one of the rulings against Barry Neufeld,
Yeah.
where he lost is even though the Supreme Court acknowledged he'd been discriminated against and he'd been slandered. They allowed that to occur because the person putting forth was speaking for a marginalized group. So the detransitioners are the marginalized of the marginalized. So we can push back against the school board saying you're supposed to be amplifying the marginalized voice within the marginalized communities. So how are you amplifying these issues? Um, I've we've put forward a couple questions out in Ontario with the one school board asking, so how are you addressing the detransition issue? They
Yeah.
keep trying to sidestep it, but you just keep you treat it as a conversation that's going to take a while to unfold. So we put forward our question. They sidestepped addressing the question, but you look at what they say in their sidestep, and then you reformulate your question and you put it forward again.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
if you can
actually the
team up with
strategy.
someone and look and just keep asking the questions.
That's the same strategy actually that the activists have used to push the law forward. So they've identified cases where they can aim to set a precedent. And if they don't win the precedent setting, they take the feedback from the judge and then they narrow their focus and they will find another case to go and try and set the precedent within the court system. And that's a process that's been going on for decades. The first moves legally towards trans inclusion began out of cases in Toronto in the I want to say the early 80s, 84, 85, where transsexual or transvestite sex workers or a sex worker was starting to fight the system, and this was one of the cases that was used as part of that. I called it precedent scaffolding. So you refine your approach, and if you're not successful, you refine it even more, and then you build another precedent on top of that, and build another precedent on top of that. And a couple of lawyers have built their whole careers out of advancing these things in law. Now we're figuring out we can use some of the same strategies and have to apply the same level of patience to moving back and bringing us back to. I liked your your phrase reality affirming care.
Yeah, I got that from Dr. Ann Gillies. She was in the documentary with me, Gender Wars in Canada. I've met
Mhm.
her since then. Yeah.
Yes, I
She
know Anne. She's lovely. She also ran for MPP in this most recent election, and was quite successful, relatively speaking, as an independent candidate or as a candidate of a new party. And her and I have talked many times over the last several years about these issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, do we have more questions? I'm watching the chat. Bear with me, Kelly. Uh,
Yeah, and the side of our um the use of language. Where like 2 years ago, it was like everybody was still using the terms trans man, trans woman, the way the trans queer activists wanted it to be
yeah,
used. And I'm now seeing more and more people are realizing that we're not just in a battle of um the battle for language is as important of a part of what we're doing as everything else. And more
indeed.
people are now saying a trans identified man, or they're using the terms, um, like the term I prefer is a man with a gender identity. And even like the phrase reality affirming care.
Yeah,
So it and like 2 years ago when I was having these talks on X with people, they didn't even understand what I was talking about. And now I'm seeing more and more of the gender critical people actually using and put forward, and they understand that this is as much a fight over the language we use because the trans queers were slowly erasing sex-based language. And now we're reclaiming that language. So even if it feels like at the time that people aren't hearing or understanding what you're saying, um, you just keep having the conversations with anyone who's willing to hear you, because eventually people will start understanding and they'll go, oh, this is what Kellie-Lynn was talking about. This is why she goes through that odd pause and talk and say a man who has taken estrogen is still a man. I avoided as much as possible the inappropriate conflation of the term trans and woman to mean a man, because a man with a gender identity is still a man. A man with a gender expression is still a man. However, he is expressing his masculinity, he's still expressing masculinity. However, I'm expressing my femininity, I'm still expressing my femininity. Sometimes I'll wear my wig and I'll wear makeup and I'll wear a dress or I'll wear a skirt if that's what I'm feeling like feeling. But I was just on a camp out in the woods and we had a campfire one night, so I was just bald with a hat on because I didn't want to burn my wig because wigs are expensive. Uh, it's like, but I'm still a woman, I'm still female, I'm still a girl. And it's so important to understand that even though it will feel frustrated, even though it'll feel like in the moment you're not being listened to, um, just keep having those conversations, because the more people hear this idea, Lindsay and Lohan talked about the mere exposure effect. So that's where just merely hearing the idea and then hearing it from more than one source and then hearing it from more than one source, and then people get the idea that, oh, okay, we're not alone in this.
yeah,
People
absolutely.
really are starting to have these counter conversations about this issue. Like I've got an opportunity to speak in court, and I had the opportunity to say, um, in a legal situation, when I was asked about my pronouns, I said, actually, I don't use pronouns. And that stood in the legal case. And when they asked me about Detrans Alliance Canada's website, and they're like, you really seem to be against gender affirming care. I said, no, I'm for reality affirming care. And they just stopped like even questioning me in that area because they didn't want to know more of my opinion and have it go down on the legal file as standing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's change is happening. And I know it seems slow and I know it seems frustrating, but it feels like we're gaining critical mass, and now we need to ask the question, how do we compassionately accept people who are different in the spaces that they belong in? How do we compassionately make it safe for a man who's chose a feminine appearance to be in male spaces? How do we compassionately make it safe for someone like me to be in women's spaces? There's times where I'm in a public restroom uh, down in the States, and women will look at me and kind of go, and there'll be that deer in the headlight moment. And I still don't know what it is I do in those moments. Because
Hmm.
there's not a lot of conversation that goes on, but something about my response lets them know that, yeah, okay, this is another woman. Um, but we need to create safety for both for those who are returning to um, their birth sex, and for those who are going to be in a place where they're having to access places that they don't actually want to be in, but legally that's going to be their option.
Hmm.
Um, and we need to find a place of compassion and love and caring and acceptance um, of those who are different. And I don't think there's a need to be taking um, like the way I see it, just knowing that men are going to be required to access men's restrooms. Therefore, if there's somebody now who's in a female rest area and behaving inappropriately, it should simply be a matter of putting forth a complaint. I've heard about there's supposed to be some case somewhere where a woman who it was a butch lesbian was supposedly kicked out of a female bathroom because she was seen as too masculine, but I haven't heard any verification of that. It seems a bit of a red herring that's being put out there. Um,
I think it's going to be trickier than you talked about the language and I don't know if you use the term reality based language and that sort of thing and reclaiming that, but I think you're talking about a larger scale kind of reclamation
yeah.
of safety here, and I can see that being a very difficult conversation to have, um, and a tough road to navigate. Um, I remember Aaron Kimberly talking about butch bladder uh, in the early days of the podcast, and uh, having concerns about what restroom, um, as a trans identified female that she was using, and yeah,
Yes, I
none
have.
of this stuff is easy.
None of this stuff is easy, and let's not pretend it's going to be easy. And I appreciate you saying that. Um, and I don't think we'll be able to satisfy everyone. And I see more and more gender neutral bathrooms, like male and female, and their single stall usage. And I think in the adult sphere, we're handling that somewhat correctly. I don't like where I'm seeing gender neutral spaces, and it's like um, 20 people are going to be accessing this space. Um, there has to be a way to attend to the safety of women and children in all of this still. Um, and that's kind of got off topic, but um, in our we need to consider how people are this whole transition mess is just how do we help these individuals to navigate public space in a safe manner is a real question.
Mhm.
Because like I say, there's times at which um there's permanent changes to my facial structure. And I already had what was considered a masculinized facial structure. So yeah, there's times at which people still see and think of me as male. Um, and I quietly and respectfully access female services. Because the reality is that I am a girl. I was born a woman. I am female. Um, and there's there's so many reasons why like people can recognize that transitioning was completely the wrong thing for them, but for real medical reasons, they're not going to be able to do what's called detransitioning. The reality is detransitioning is stopping transitioning. And then there's a retransitioning process back to my natal sex. And that retransitioning process is all of the fun and games of early recovery. Because I've gone from one powerful chemical, which was testosterone, back on to estrogen. And I've had all of the emotional dysregulation of my first year of recovery from alcoholism. I've had the days where I've just sat in bed crying. Um, or like I just had an amazing retreat with my discipleship group, and I came home and I spent 2 days in bed because I just felt so many feelings. Um, so I still have the all of the intensity of being back on estrogen again. And there's days where those feelings just feel completely overwhelming. And today is a day where I'm just starting to pick up the pieces and re-engage with life and the world and everything all over again. Um, so it's not just this simple, easy process of go buy a bra and go get a wig and shave your face. There is so much about the emotions, and I'm just starting to grapple with um, the ways in which men treat me differently because they see me as female. Because I had 17 years of my life where men didn't see me as female, so they treated me as if I were a male because I had that appearance. And now I'll be having a conversation with a guy, and all of a sudden the conversation will get weird because he's like, "Oh, should I be having this conversation with a woman?" You know? Um, so I recognize that, and so I have conversations with some of my siblings who are male, and um, where they always treated me as their sister. However, 4 years ago, when I had a 6-inch beard, if they'd asked me if I checked the oil in my car, and I said yes, it's fine, they would have taken my word for it. But now I look like a female, so they won't take my. I was like, oh no, I know you're a girl, so I just, like, let's go out and check the oil in your car, right? And it's frustrating because I know that we're doing it this way because you see me as female, and I really appreciate that. But it's like, oh my goodness.
It's good. It's good you're laughing. I Yeah. We talked early when
I,
we met back in June. They were much earlier in the process, and you shared some of that experience with me, and uh, you know, it seems like your journey is progressing, and things are coming along. Kellie-Lynn, we're at just about 20 after 9. And as usual, we've run a little bit over our time that we've allocated. I wanted to ask you, kind of in closing, what's the, if we're looking towards the end of this year, we're still early in 2025. Um, Maybe what's the biggest thing that you hope to see? Um, given our understanding of how patient we have to be with progress, what are you hoping to see unfold in the next 9 or 12 months?
sex recognition. I think we can go forward from what we see happening out of the United States. And April Hutchinson has such an amazing testimony.
Hmm.
She has
Hmm.
stuck in there with sports and gone, females keep female sports female. So let's step behind that wedge that has been created, step behind that breach that has been created, and go, you know what? We need to have sex recognized in Canada on our ID, and we need to return to access to spaces, swimming pools, sports, prison being based on sex. Because there is not a single incident that I know of in first world countries where a woman who takes testosterone has demanded her right to have her gender affirmed as male and be put into male space. So let's recognize this and step into that breach behind them and start asking, anyone who is comfortable being known publicly, send a letter off to your MLA saying, hey, what about detransitioners? Send a letter off to your public school board. Like, if you're able to do it, just send them a question saying, how in the SOGI curriculum are you acknowledging the marginalized of the marginalized? And what are you doing to let kids know about detransitioning?
Great.
Yeah.
We have been surprised by how quickly things have been moving. I certainly have. Um, After going through a couple of phases of dashed hopes, actually seeing situations now where things are. I'm in the investment business. I will say, watch for language that says better than expected, because that's a good sign
Yeah.
that things are accelerating. It's better than, oh wow, we thought this was going to happen, and this happened, and so that's a yeah. I share your hope that we'll make that progress this year, and we can have that recognition. And um, any last questions that people might have? I'm looking in the Q&A section and in the chat. I'm thankful to all the people who've joined us tonight, live, as we've gone through with our guests, and with some of the awareness videos that we've shared. And I saw that Faith is here. Faith, thanks you very much for sharing your experience. And I'm very glad that you could uh, make other
Oh,
people aware of what you've been going through. Kellie-Lynn.
something to mention real quick because I didn't know about this. Chest restoration surgery is being funded at provincial levels as women individually request it.
Wow, that's
Yeah, I had
that
no
must be
idea.
very
I,
recent,
I learned
because
about it at the seminar I attended, and the individual had her surgery, I think, 4 years ago. They're just being pipsqueak quiet about it.
right,
But when people know enough to put forward the request,
yeah.
they're being allowed to access the service.
Well, that's great news, uh, and it speaks to what progress we are making. That this is at this point quietly being done. Um, I'm just having a look here at questions. Uh, so I think on that note, Kellie-Lynn, Detrans Alliance Canada, is that the website?
Yes,
Um, and your handle on Twitter is at
Kelly-Dac, I think. I always
Okay.
get those mixed up because I ended up having to have a bunch of
Well,
different ones.
as we slice and dice these, and we put them
Kelly
up on
Fury
YouTube.
Detrans Canada, DAC. Yeah.
Okay. We'll put links into the video so make sure that people can find you. And Detrans Alliance Canada was formed to support detransitioners, if I recall correctly. And so, for people who are watching, maybe this is a quiet um, a moment of questioning for you, and on Detrans Awareness Day International, and you're taking some of this in. There are resources available for you in Canada. We talked earlier about legal resources, and there's people who've gone through this experience who are willing to support you in your journey, as you continue on it. And I want to thank all of our organizers. Our Duty Canada, as always, a tremendous contributor to support and create these events. And really want to thank you a lot for your ongoing contribution and the real difference that you've made in the lives of parents and families across the country. So today is the 12th of March. And look over the next couple of weeks for these videos to be put up on Canadian Culture Wars Report. And if you have any questions, you can reach out.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shannon. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us again, Kellie-Lynn. And thanks everybody for joining us.